Strigoni Child in Midway Monsters. Now that all my fayness is coming in, I think I ought to get involved in the family business, even if I gotta eavesdrop to do it. I'm still only 11 this cycle, which is plenty small enough to hide under one of the painted conny wagons in the back lot of the summer fair. The wheel spokes split the world up into sections of bright summer sun and pretty carved shadows. I skim my eyes across the wooden bumps and loops, every little nick and swirl. The pattern hums down into my bones like a tuning fork when you smack it. It twines up in harmony with the smell of dust and animals and bedstraw and daisy and ribbon wreaths on every post out here, and the slapping of canvas fair flags high above, and even the faraway sound of the bandstand keys and horns and the midway rattle. Last cycle, I wouldn't have been able to hear it all so well. Now I'm growing into myself, just like Mum says. Ahead in the back lot, one of the carnival barkers is sitting on an upsides-down wash bucket and reading a pink pamphlet, with the droopy-eyed hound dog nosing at her hand. The gems on her vest glint so sharp and hot that my teeth grit. I let the singing up to my hands. When I shake out both wrists, tiny sparkles ride the heat up and disappear, taking all my tension with them. Maxim crouches next to me, careful enough to keep the hem of their solstice dress out of the dirt. Is she fey? They ask me as they watch the barker. I can't see anything fey on them. Their voice whips down into my stomach, builds impulsive pressure, and before I can stop it, people don't always look fey, Maxim. I snap. A blast of hot air rushes over him, wilting the daisy behind their ear and gusting their fluffy black hair from their face. The last bit of energy's gone now. In the silence, Maxim just blinks at me with their lips wrinkling open. They've got a wide brown face and wide green eyes, real open and honest in a way that always makes me feel a bit rotten getting mad at. Shoot, I mutter. Mum says that by the time I'm picking my name and deciding who I'm gonna be as a grown-up, I'll have enough practice to keep from snapping like that. But for now, I gotta be careful. I flex my hands a bit. I didn't mean that. Maxim's too good. It's okay, they say, just as quiet. Maxim's not a smiling sort, but I see how clear their eyes are, and I know we're all right. I lean sideways so our shoulders bump each other. Maxim's mortal and born in Dale, where they don't much talk about Faye out loud, and had 5 whole cycles without me. I know I ought to catch him up. I point between the spokes, dragging my sharp nail through the air. She's got her dog. See how she keeps petting at it? It's gotta be a familiar. That makes sense, they say, both of us squishing warm and tight to watch. I heard about all this. Faye, mortal, hold hands around the fire hoopla, the worker in the lot says. Her dog noses at her knee. She takes a long, deep breath and she sets the pamphlet on her lap. She turns her face away from us. So before I say anything more, I ought to know if you're the Maxim twin with the good sense to stay in Midtown, or the ones that's always picking fights on the docks. She's talking to Maxim's daddy leaned against another wagon nearby, the painting on the side putting him in a frame like he's a pretty curiosity. His hat's low and his white pale face, cutting a big black shadow across his eyes. When he speaks, a cloud of cigar smoke washes around him. For the record, we were barren on the docks, so I figure it's my fight to pick. He says, looking all wiry and wily like only dockside folk can, mouth grim and serious in the smoke. Maxim and I both peer closer. I gotta say, Shun and Maxim might be the coolest person we both know. If you're worried we'll talk to any cops about what you say here, trust me when I tell you they'd kick my stomach in before I could get anything out. I don't chum with mortals, the barker says. So she is a fae. And I'm sure the folks eating caviar on First Street are glad for that. He says, shoulders tense and ready. Oh, I understand the reservations, miss, but I come from the poor yards too. I think us down here eating gristle ought to remember what we have in common. Maxim squints. Gristle, they say quietly, and then twice more, even quieter. What's that mean? They ask. Turning like I got all the answers. I shrug. I'm not any older than they are. We've got different parents, and so we were born on the same day. Real faded like that. The back of the barker's candy-striped uniform shifts like she's grown something along her spine. Feathers, maybe, or crystals. The dog senses their energies up, and it starts to growl, lips wrinkle back from its teeth. I take my hands off the spokes to flick sparkles from my nervous fingers. Well, then I don't want trouble, she says, in a voice that makes Maxim shuffle closer to me. And trouble seems to follow you. The corners of Shedden's mouth twist up. He turns his head to the third person in the back lot, just out of our sight. I'd argue that a private investigator is following the trouble, Mum says, from the shadow off the huge circus tent. Her voice swings with a thick Verdosi accent, all calm like a slow river twisting through mountains I barely remember now. Even the dog snarling stills. It creeps back towards its owner, beady eyes still on Shannon. But I think we can make better use of our time than by interrogating his credentials. Rest assured that I keep my mortal man in check where he needs it. The Barker's knees relax as Mum steps forward, in a Verdosi dress and sash that she brought on the boat when I was small, the hems bordered with embroidered flowers in the same style covering the kerchief holding back her thick dark curls. In the light, with my senses all sharp, I notice how we look so damn similar, down to the tan skin and the arch of our noses. Except Mum's older than me. Her power's so much stronger. She's grown a band of opal shining scales from nose to cheekbone. One of my eyes is the same color. The first thing I changed before I much knew how to control this. The carnival owners can pay us by half of what they'd pay men like my husband. It drives down the price of his labor. Endangers newcomers to this country who don't much care how the coin comes in. Keeps us all begging for scraps. Mum says. The Barker must be cooling off. The back of her uniform smooths. I see no downside in a fair wage for all of us. Do you? Maxim and I press our shoulders together, watching close to see how the Barker reacts. She don't look worried no more. Instead, she tilts her head, like she's sizing up the argument. Legally, the Barker says, crossing her arms, they ain't under no obligations to pay me full. Never finished schooling. Had to leave when the condition got too strong. Me too. As soon as I started spitting out sparkles whenever the math problems were too hard, and my teachers wanted to put me in classes all by myself. Mum and Shannon knew regular school wasn't going to help me much. I swallowed the prickly feeling in my throat, tried to listen to what the Barker is saying through the searing sunshine, but I gave in to the impulse and ended up on the ground with my stomach unzippered from navel to neck. I wasn't old enough to stress test, so they just expelled me, and I have to close my eyes tight. I hate hearing about what happens when the power gets too big and you ain't ready for it. I hate knowing about the stress tests and the madhouses. Dragoni, Maxim whispers, putting their hand careful over mine. It's grounded and it stops my pointy nails from glowing orange. I crack my eyes open just a tiny bit, enough to see Maxim looking at me with those big, sincere, mortal eyes. We can go get popcorn. I still have tickets. I press my lips together. I know I ought to leave, but the temptation to keep listening is too damn strong. Like it's got its claw on my chin to make me watch. I snap my fingers to let piddly sparkles off, and it's enough. But this is small power. New and learning to grow stronger and smarter. If my body asked me to unzip myself to make the bad feelings go away, would I catch the thought before it was too late? If it asked me to hurt someone, could I stop it? The question pushes up behind my already sharp teeth, building pressure in my veins until my ears ring. I stare at Maxim so close I can see every pore and the flecks of coal dust and dirt still clinging there, even out here in the sunshiny country where birds are chirping just nearby. I want to ask, would you still love me if I hurt someone, Maxim? But I don't want to say it out loud. Because just for today, we're out where the sun is shining like the bad things can't get us. I know we'll hop back on the trolley in only a few bells and fade back into the smoky city of Pucksport, where things don't feel perfect at all. I got you, Strigoni, Maxim says, because they can read my mind like a blood twin. Like we're Maxim and Maxim, the dockyard duo, heroes and geniuses fit for radio plays. Things are changing, right? I bet you... They swallow, because they can't make promises, but they try anyway. I bet you there won't even be madhouses once we're named, and you'll be all powerful like your mum, keeping things real controlled. It's that last part that makes the tension flood under my feet to potch the dirt. It's a nice thought, but Maxim's only mortal. I squint back between the spokes, to where Mom's standing in the light with her pearly scales. The world isn't made for us, she says. Two tiny horns sprout from just above her hairline. The uptown folk can pretend Dale has changed since the fire-burning days, but they built a world without us while we rotted out of reach of it. We can make something better. All of us. Between the tents, dark laneways lead back to the carnival roads screaming out for us, and back to the city that can't stand us. You talk like a radical, the Barker says. She stands up, but she don't look scared one bit. She's smiling, with all her teeth just barely pointed, so I only notice now that I'm looking. Careful with that talk, miss. They save cells for folks like that. And if they take Mum away, what then? I press my hands together, breath held tight, tight, tight. I dare them to try, Mum says. Until then, we're happy to be in contact with you. The Barker eyes Shannon a bit, but he's got his sights on the lanes. Charmed, the Barker agrees. She steps forward, extends her hand. Can I have your name? Mum grins. She claps her palms together in a sturdy shake. The air pauses like the clack of a radio shutting off. like all the singing auras are quiet to hear the Fae. Hazel Strigoni, Mum says, and proves just how strong she is. A ripple sprints through the air, smelling like green and dew. Maxim and I, wide-eyed, press forward between the spokes to watch vines bloom from Mum's clasped palm, looping over the Balker's hand and wrapping tight at their wrist like hand-fastened cords. Pink specks grow from the green, twisted into foxgloves that move and sway to their own little songs. The petals falling and regrowing and falling again, whipping around Mum and the worker while the dog barks happily. The petals climb in a torrent of wind the color of pink pearls, kicking up sparkling dust. Beside me, Maxim reaches one clay-brown hand out for them. Through the storm, Shannon looks to Mum and sweeps his hat back to watch. His eyes are wide as Maxim's, awestruck and sparkling above his straight mouth. And Mum in the middle, she doesn't even blink, doesn't even shake, don't lose breath or control, the power rushing out of her like a smooth wave. I get that feeling like a cherry pit in my heart, that ache of loving someone so much you think you might choke on it. Love you die for. Looking at Mum, I know that being a Fae doesn't mean you're destined to be destroyed by the thing in your blood. You are that thing, Mum says, and madness is a mortal word for something they don't understand. Keep your eye on us, Mum says. I hum, bringing heat into my throat and purring under my skin, letting out all that love and tiny rays of light that make Maxim gasp. They're brighter than they were yesterday. I promise that change is coming far sooner than you think. I'm changing too, and this rotten world better be ready. Property of the Pucksport Police Department, Article A52 in the case of Maxim versus Strigoni. Released to public record 52 SC 6S12. The Diary of Hazel Strigoni, Radical Fae. 42 SC 6 Summer Moons, Summer Solstice. The decision to cut myself away from my homeland and towards Dale has not been an easy one, especially with a child not yet 3 cycles old who already has a pale eye to proclaim their Faeism. Perhaps that is why I took the trip as we churned toward the darkest days. Our village in Verdoso was an idyllic place to raise a Fae child, where poor farmers need us to scent the earth and air, where cycles run slow enough to accommodate time to calm ourselves, where we are not suppressed but embraced. Still, I can in fact scent the wind as well as any other. Once, Dale was seen as a far-away problem, something we were simply glad not to be born into, a country whose pyres and later their madhouses were nothing more than ghost stories. We were foolish. As Dale builds its industrial wealth, as even Verdosi officials begin changing our calendars to mark cycles since Dale's Confederacy, as our city centers sprout iron smithies and telephone lines and push fast-moving factories into our slow villages to make even time unaffordable. We must act. If our country builds itself according to Dale, so many of us will starve beyond the walls of this new world. The Fae struggle is the same as that of the poor, the worker, the very old and the very young. We are not the sorts who make political decisions, and thus we are not the sorts this new world is being built for. I refuse the notion that our power is a curse and liability. I refuse to think myself more dangerous than the madhouses where so many of our own disappear into themselves, collapsing under the stress like dying stars. That is pain and destruction, but where is the outcry for justice in their names? The world sits by quietly while we burn. That is why I have come to Dale, because Verdoso will not stay safe forever, and I will not sit in wait. Call me impulsive or mad, discredit my name. My fear is still real. Dale's capital, Pucksport, is where real evil could occur. But take peace and warning both. It is also where change can spark. I will not let the world watch in silence. Tonight, I am in Pucksport, in a shanty apartment with walls so thin I can hear the children crying 4 doors down, and a radio from 4 floors up. Incessant trains cut autos and coal and iron day and night above our heads, and the air smells of fish screaming for their last breath before they drown on land. During the day, beggars, so many of them Fae, ask for coins I do not have. Tonight I am in Dale. Tomorrow I will be in Dale still, because our suffering will only be temporary. I'm not sure of how I can change anything, only that I must try, despite the perils. Change is coming to Dale, and soon the entire world. I will show them their own horrors reflected back. I will not be afraid. Max and Child in Gathered Evidence. After that perfect summer day, Max and Child would be orphaned, and would spend the next cycle attempting to explain how one moment turned to the next. It was, frankly, impossible to articulate. Each time they tried, the whole mess seemed more mythical than real. Things had started out rather ordinarily, including when Strigoni had begged them to listen in on the Barker. Maxim only began to mark a strangeness in the day after Strigoni and Hazel had run off to buy popcorn, leaving Maxim's daddy to step into the cold shadows of a public phone booth with Maxim clinging close beside him. Shen and Maxim kept one hand on the back of his child's head while he wrestled for a tarnished Pix in his pocket. You know, when I was your age, he started, which was how most adults did in a country so rapidly changing. But from below, Maxim could see under the shadows of his hat. His milk-white face seemed gray amidst smoky clouds, his mouth crooked to keep the cigar between his teeth and yet still wrinkled more than usual. He'd been chain-smoking all day, a phrase Maxim had learned from his aunt when she playfully scolded him. We had to send letters, Shannon went on, feeding in the rattling coin and snatching up the phone piece. Curse, we couldn't afford postage either. I'd write to your mum on the back of newspapers. Leave them on her sill. Maxim nodded. They never much knew how to respond to stories about their mother, who had died when Maxim was still a toddler, and left their daddy nearly catatonically devastated on his sister's doorstep. Maxim couldn't recall who had told them this, or if they just gleaned it from tone and subtext, its own sort of private detective mystery. Growing up with a daddy and an aunt who hunted robbers and murderers and who knew better than to share too many details, Maxim had gotten good at patterning out evidence, at least enough to know when to stay unseen and quiet. The phone crackled on in a garble of operator chatter. Shannon tapped his fingers against the phone box. Send me to Rory, will you? He asked. Puff, puff, puff went the cigar, burning down faster. More clicks and then the chatter on the end. Morning, Rory, he breathed, almost like a gasp. Rory Gaetano was the only switchboard that Shannon Maxim trusted. Hello, Mix Gaetano, Maxim offered quietly. There was a snarl of chatter. Shannon's fingers tapped a bit harder against the cold iron box. Nah, they told me it would print this morning. What's done is done, he said. Miss Victoriezzi was a journalist. Again, the only one Shannon Maxim trusted to break bad news. He closed his eyes and swallowed. I need you to patch me to Shona, he said, almost a whisper. The tone made Maxim's blood go icy. The carnival was reaching its midday rush, and yet Maxim couldn't hear or see it from the isolation of that little phone booth. She left me a letter. Oh, I know she's pissed with me, but I need to try. Be quick. Shannon looked back out to the dusty path, as if someone might be watching. Adele didn't really want me calling today. A mumble of agreement, then the muffled tolling of the phone. Shannon Maxim stared into the voice funnel with his eyes shining. Were there tears? Upon later recognition, Maxim couldn't be sure. Maxim debated if they should say anything. The line told and told. Shona Maxim did not answer. Maybe she's out, Maxim suggested. No answer. Maxim pressed their lips together, debated again, and lightly tapped his shoe into their daddy's. Shannon blinked hard as if surprised, but turned his head enough to see Maxim staring up at him. Had he wiped his eyes then on the rough sleeve of his suit jacket? Maybe she's out, Maxim tried again. Shannon's lips pressed tight together. Maxim would later learn that she was out, on the trolley heading back from the police precinct where she'd had to do some capital A ass kissing to patch up what Miss Ezzie had printed. Maxim and Maxim were on the outs, and everyone knew it, aside from little Maxim Child, who could only sense the unease. The tolling stopped. Maxim craned up a bit higher. Sorry, Shannon, Rory Gaetano said in their soft, reedy voice with Verdoso still twisted on the edges. She's not picking up. I can call the diner under her. Midge can head up to check. Shannon Maxim rubbed a thumb along the edge of his button-small nose. No, he said, voice empty. Just keep me through. Shannon, Rory said. I'm sure she'll pull off. Put me through, Gaetano. Shannon Maxim snapped, so loud that Maxim flinched. I need to talk to her. Now. Rory paused. Patching you through, amico. Are we still on for taxes tonight? Shannon Maxim closed his eyes tight. Maybe, he said. Maybe. Like he knew something bad was coming. In that flash moment of understanding, one that wouldn't sink in longer than a sparked second, Maxim noticed how their daddy's slacks seemed too big now, and that he was missing a star-shaped button on his vest, that his orange hair was slipping from the silk ribbon that held it in a long tail down his back. Maxim's pulse beat thicker. as if they understood that Shen and Maxim would not survive until nightfall, and that he may well have known this too. That he wanted to get out one last, "I love you," with either an, "I understand what I'm walking into," or even an, "I messed up, Shona. I'm scared, and I need you to save me." The line told, and Shona couldn't answer in time. Her twin was going to die, because she wasn't there to save him from his own mistakes. "Maxim!" someone shouted. Maxim Child jumped, their thoughts already evaporated to leave behind only a heavy sediment of dread. Still, they turned to see Strigoni come sprinting up to the open phone booth, framed by the hanging flower garlands over the arch, shoulders heaving from the ecstatic sprint. Maxim felt immediately better, happier and lighter just to see them with untangling braids, trailing ribbons, and a wrinkled old work shirt hanging over bony limbs, and sharp teeth under mismatched eyes, all alight in the sunshine beyond the phone booth. Strigoni grabbed Maxim's wrist, yanking them out in a rush of fey-made sparkles swirling around them both like fireflies. Maxim had only a moment to look over their shoulder. Shen and Maxim stood ahead of the tolling phone, light through the top of the warp booth coming down in stream through the lingering smoke. Maxim was possessed with the unexplainable, infantile urge to cling to their daddy. But that was the last thing Maxim Child remembered clearly. What would follow would be glimpsed only in faint memories burnt through by concussion and trauma. Brief flashes like movie stills. And it was this. Strigoni's gold-green hand taking them down the path, saying they were going to the carousel, leading them. The feeling of how their palms fit well into each other. Looking back to see Hazel standing outside the phone booth, grim-faced, snapping her fingers carefully at her side. With each pronounced click, a dusting of pollen sprinkled down around her. But when Shannon hung up the phone, every flower on the booth's drip garland wilted at once. The taste of sour earth flooded through Maxim's mouth. Hazel put her hand on her husband's arm, leading him twitchy and nervous back into the light. She looped her arm through his, tight as confinement. Staring down the people they passed with rapt attention, the baggy flashes of trouser legs, the floral patterns on waistcoats and dresses, the silky ribbons and feathers and stuffed birds on straw hats, the lace on parasols. Everyone's shoes dusted up the same, so the rich people looked like the poor people. Like everyone was just people. A barker in front of the carousel. A fae with long, thin horns who pretended not to see the suspicious glare of the mortals, and who winked at Strigoni in a rush of pearly sparkles, but didn't seem to see Maxim. The monstrous faces of the carousel ponies, grinning and sneering through the blur of Maxim's aching stomach. Maxim saw himself in those swirling mirrors on the inner post. They looked so small. On the carousel, the soothing up and down, watching for the posts sprouted just beside the ride, where a single brass prize ring spun like a planet, and making sure to tell Strigoni when to lunge for it, in case they were distracted. The sky was brilliantly blue. Hazel and their daddy, waiting so far back in the sea of parents they were just two solitary pillars against a painfully vibrant tent. But they had their heads together, mouths sharp and quick in the bright light that hid Shen and Maxim's eyes. They were arguing, Maxim realized. Hazel's hands flying quick and Shannon speaking fast, shoulders tight. Something was wrong, on a day when nothing should be. They couldn't hear the crowd's rumbling and the calliope music. Hazel's hands ripped through the air like a scythe. All around her feet, the pastel grass began to wilt. Maxim held their breath, terrified that the mortals nearby might see and report her, that cops could arrive and order a stress test to coax some truth out. But Hazel would pass, yes. She could stay composed even as the shocks grew worse and worse, could choose to fall unconscious with the pain rather than follow the impulse to lash out mad. If anyone could, it was her. The day would pass, they would visit Auntie Shona, and everything would be all right. From the outside pony, Strigoni was watching their mother too. Maxim became certain that, whatever was being said, Strigoni was hearing it. And letting in all that sound wasn't good for them. Silhouetted against the sun-struck world beyond, Strigoni's fingernails had begun to glow, color leaking up their arms along the veins like bad blood, sinking through the rough weave of their shirt. It wasn't dangerous, but it was obvious. "Ring," Maxim muttered, which pulled Strigoni's focus fast. Over the crowd, Maxim watched in horror as Hazel continued to whip through words so fast that Shen and Maxim recoiled slightly, sweat beading from under the shadows of his hat. 2 little specks sprouted from Hazel's forehead, black as jet. They grew into antlers clawing up for the blue sky, sparkling with glints like stars. Hazel knew better than to do something so powerful in public. Nearby, a woman gasped and took 2 steps away. Hazel shot her an angry glare, teeth snarling sharp. Strigoni Child kept one hand gripped on their pony's post and lunged out into the light, fingers swinging towards the shiny brass ring just beyond easy grasp. Half desperate, Shen and Maxim jolted forward. Strigoni Child's pointy-nailed finger looped through the ring and plucked away the prize. Giselle Strigoni's wrist was suddenly grabbed in the cold, mortal claw of her husband. It would not stop the massacre that followed. This concluded what Maxim understood with certainty. What they wouldn't ever know was that the next part had been a tragic accident. One last gram of gravity to collapse a titanic star in on itself, or a long calculated choice to set this horrible, awful, rotten world ablaze. Everything following was patched together by Strigoni's account, and their aunts, and the dozens of newspaper reports that hashed and rehashed the event until any possible recollection was overwritten by someone else's pen. As far as Maxim remembered, they were suddenly off the carousel, blinking in the white sunlight. Strigoni clutched their hand on one side and the carousel's brass ring on the other. Maxim understood that, following this moment, nothing would be the same. Strigoni? Maxim mumbled, blinking to stop the waning image of their sibling's face from fraying about the edges and mixing into the muddled background. Something wet was dripping from Maxim's ears. The liquid was deep gray, nearly black, so viscous it seemed unreal. Maxim could see it somehow, as if watching the scene from a picture show seat. Maxim's mouth opened. The voice that came out seemed too young. "Where's my daddy?" Strigoni's eyes stared ahead, mouth and eyes wide as a gasping fish's. Maxim found himself incapable of turning to see what Strigoni was fixated on. The air smelled like ash and smoke, but beneath that, dew and flowers. Maxim screwed up their face, trying to force out proper words, and yet there came that impossibly young, impossibly childish voice. "Where's my daddy?" It startled them because that wasn't what they'd meant to say. This was, of course, related to the concussion, and so too was the gray color of Strigoni's face, which was not just sick gray, but gray-gray. Maxim was increasingly aware that everything was colored like a photograph. The sky was no longer blue, Strigoni's skin was no longer green-gold, and the stitches on their kerchief were only gray on black. "Maxim," Strigoni choked out, blinking hard with the pop cough from the portrait camera. "Look." Maxim finally turned. What they found was devastation worse than any dockyard row fire, or in their own mother's blue-drowned body. The fair was gone. Maxim and Strigoni stared at the great gap in the grass where the carousel had been, where there was instead nothing but gray dirt, as if someone had plucked it from this plain. The carousel was still there, simply tipped on its side, where roughly 24 children lay dead beneath it like dropped apples. This included 4 children from the Tanner family, who later became the epitome of tragedy, while Maxim and Strigoni became a symbol of freakish serendipity. Because though the rest of the fair around them in great circles was reduced to matchsticks and loose canvas, dead horses and dead elephants and dead people, Maxim and Strigoni remained virtually unharmed. It would be called either the last pure intentions of a mad radical, or a miracle. Maxim still isn't sure. Beside the carousel, just 10 steps away from the 2 children, the ground was scorched blacker than pitch, still burning. Maxim knew that was where Hazel and their daddy had stood moments ago. Where their feet had been, something sprouted into the silent air. Even from a distance, Maxim knew what it was. They found themselves standing next to it, but couldn't remember walking over. Only Strigoni could tell the color of the sprouted thing, so only they could confirm what Maxim already assumed. "It's a foxglove," Strigoni said, hollowly, but Maxim didn't care much about the flower. They were looking at the white bits near it, which they wanted to believe were just rocks. Law enforcement would later confirm them to be teeth, specifically the teeth of controversial dockyard detective Shannon Maxim. May he walk the good path. Mom gave in, Strigoni breathed. Perhaps this had always been the plan. Did their daddy know? Was he arguing because he wanted it to stop? Had he willfully put his children in the blast zone, believing that he could usher in a new and better age? The ringing air whistled around the 2 of them. All that silence, all that ash raining down. Strigoni's voice tightened from shock to terror. Mom did it. Mom blew up. Maxim! They didn't want to hear it, and so they didn't. The day faded into gray nothingness. Shona Maxim received tear-filled, wall-shaking, screaming custody of her brother's children. Maxim Child never recovered the ability to see color. The story goes on. The day is put in the past. As far as Maxim Child is concerned, it ought to stay there. After all this heartache, the least the world can do is let them forget.